Wake up in the morning, what do I see? Dark clouds forming in the heavens over me. But I say hallelujah anyway, 'cause tomorrow's a brand new day. Tomorrow's a brand new day, and the sun gon' shine down on me.
Towards the end of my breakdown for the teaser for part 2, I referenced how Davis MacLean once said, "It's survival of the fittest." He does what he needs to do in order to survive, which I think extends to majority of the players on Book 2 Ghost. When push comes to shove, a lot of these characters will look out for number 1 in order to protect themselves, their families, loved ones, or their future, whether that be in the game or further education. But as we all know, no day is ever the same in the world of power, especially not in Ghost. There are always going to be situations that will alter the directions for some of these players, which will lead to either death or jail. So, in this breakdown, we're going to run through some updated death predictions, considering we're now past the halfway stage, and also considering we've now seen the teaser for part 2. We're going to run through player by player, whether I think they're going to go to power hell, whether they survive, or whether some characters just remain in the danger zone. And as always, let me know whether you agree, disagree, or just your general thoughts and death predictions for all things Power Book 2 Ghost Season 4 Part 2. Now, just as a very quick recap, I did do a death predictions video prior to Season 4, where I did call a few deaths where some were wrong, and also where some are still open and in the air. On the death list, we had Obi, Salim, and Junior Valdez, who did all die in Part 1. In regards to law enforcement, I did also put Jenny Sullivan in the danger zone, but it seems like she's moved on to pastures new. I also said either one of Trace or Rebecca Weston could potentially bite the dust. Trace seems to have left New York, however, Rebecca Weston is still very much on the cards, especially based on a few scenes we've seen in Part 1, and also a particular scene for the teaser for Part 2. So we're going to get to whether this could actually be Rebecca or Elle later on. Effie was split 50-50, and the same goes for Davis MacLean and Diana. I also had Dru biting the dust, and potentially Tasha, who were always going to be death predictions for much later in Season 4. Elsewhere, I also said the Russians could also be at risk, and in regards to Tariq St Patrick, I said he would survive along with Kane and Monet, and my mind hasn't changed based on what we've seen in Part 1. But first, let's start with a few new characters that were introduced in Part 1, starting with Zion. Now, for those who watched the Crew Has It podcast, we already knew Brayden and Tariq would be working with a crazy new character, and in 403, we learned it was Zion. Since then, we've learned about him owning this underground fight circle. We also heard about the connection to Tommy and Ghost, and also Davis warning that he's unpredictable, a side that we haven't seen yet, but it definitely is coming. He also lost in a fight to Kane after he warned Noma that New York was his city, which was after Noma made a move with the Russians. But he is on my death predictions list because he's a character who, like Davis said, is unpredictable, and he won't take too kindly to that Kane defeat. He's going to come in all guns blazing in Part 2, trying to get that respect back on his name, and we also see him choking out Tariq. However, these couple of scenes I do think go hand in hand, especially the one with Tariq taking the kill shot. We saw something very similar prior to Season 4, where we could tell Tariq was taking the kill shot on Junior, and I do think the same is happening here. Why that is, it could potentially be because Zion might potentially be the reason why Diana loses her baby, which puts Kane and Tariq on the same side, at least when it comes to Zion. But either way, however they end up here, I don't think he lasts too long in Part 2, so Zion, in my opinion, he's out of here. Now, Elle is another character who I do think we have to add to the list after watching Part 1, and also considering what we saw in the teaser for Part 2. She knows way too much, she loves her drugs, and we also know she suffers from sickle cell, so the writers can really take their pick in terms of how they want to turn this story really dark when it comes to the character of Elle. Now, I initially thought that Brayden might be holding up a gun to Elle in her bedroom based on the background, but I might actually be mistaken. However, it still doesn't change my mind in regards to Elle's fate, and also Brayden actually being the one to potentially do it. Elle knowing about their business is very risky, so I do feel like Brayden will have a decision to make in Part 2, very much like how Tommy had to make a decision when it came to Holly. There's been a lot of parallels to Power in Season 4, especially when it comes to Tariq being father like son, but it also extends to Tiny Tommy.
Tell me something. You as crazy as Tommy.
See you soon, Tiny Tommy.
Zion's been poking fun at Brayden a lot, and I do wonder whether they're just getting us geared up for Brayden's next turn. We all know Brayden isn't anything like Tommy, there are a lot of differences, but could he make a very similar move to what Tommy did with Holly back in OG Power? Could Brayden get rid of Elle? Or could she actually suffer an overdose or have issues in regards to her illness where she can't get to her medication in time? Or where her medication is actually swapped out with something else? Just like I mentioned before, the writers have so many ways in which they can decide Elle's fate, but either way, I do think her time is up, because in order for Brayden's character to really grow, and in order for him to lose that humanity that bit more, he needs to feel the loss of a loved one, which also brings me around to his sister, Rebecca. Now, she was someone who I did put in the danger zone in my death predictions video before season 4, and I did specifically say a potential overdose. Why? Because the Weston name has been tarnished, she has a history of taking drugs, and also because of something she said before in season 2.
Becca, slow down on the wine. These people will decide if you get into Stansfield.
LOL, Mom.
The endowment already did that. Can you talk to
I could overdose on the stage for all they care.
So did they foreshadow what's to come with Rebecca? Or is this Elle? I do think Elle is definitely a goner, and I do still feel we need to keep eyes on what happens with Rebecca Weston. So let's see who's at the hospital. It's either one of Elle or Rebecca. I do think we need to keep both in mind. Now, we've been waiting a long time to see Rashad Tate, but why now? And why does he look so distressed? Why does it look like he has real pain in his eyes? I can only think of one thing. His brother Kamaal Tate has unfortunately fell victim to the consequences of this drug game, as innocent civilians or cops sometimes normally do in the world of power. Whether it's actually being killed by drug dealers, by Detective Carter himself, or by Carter having someone else do his dirty work for him, that's yet to be seen. But if we were to make a prediction based on what we've seen in part 1, and us knowing how Kamaal Tate is one of the very good cops, I think he's going to find out or come very close to uncovering the truth in regards to what Detective Carter is really up to. And as Zion once said to Tariq, I feel like Carter will want to deal with the problem before it becomes a problem, but at the same time, keep his hands clean, which is where he may outsource to the Tejadas or even Tariq. But either way, however this plays out, I do think Kamaal Tate will go, and this is what I feel will bring Rashad Tate back into the picture, which is when I think it's going to start to get really interesting, because rest assured, Rashad Tate will dig deep, he will have questions, he will investigate, he is also an ex-police officer himself, and maybe he even takes matters into his own hands. So, let's see what happens in the aftermath if Kamaal Tate does bite the dust, which I fully expect to happen based on this particular scene. Now, where does that actually leave Detective Carter? There is no way a character like Carter survives come the end of Ghost. He's an absolute menace, and we've only seen a glimpse of what he's capable of. But surely, even with his level of power and control, there is no way he survives, especially if he is involved in getting rid of Kamaal Tate, because if he is, then you can bet Rashad Tate will do whatever's necessary to bring him and his entire task force down, and he'll also have the help of Tariq and the Tejadas. At some point, all of these guys are going to try and figure out a way to try and get out from Carter's thumb, and I do fully expect them to work together when they do. He's creating a hell of a lot of enemies, and I'm sure everybody who he has under his thumb will definitely be looking for a way to bring him down. However, we do have to bear in mind, the actors did apparently expect to come back to film a season 5, so I don't think it's going to be a full-on onslaught or a bloodbath. There definitely will be a few deaths, and maybe even a surprising 1 or 2, but I wouldn't be surprised to see a lot of loose ends come the end of season 4, and considering Carter is new, I do wonder if his story was set to continue if there was a season 5, and that's something we have to bear in mind for majority of these characters, not just for Carter. But if Carter does go down, who does Carter take down with him? We know from the teaser in part 2, he is going to put Dru in jail, but will he catch anybody else, or could he kill anyone else? We all know he's not shy in pulling the trigger on those who hurt civilians, so let's see what's in store for Detective Carter in part 2. I'd put him in that category of being in the danger zone. Now this actually brings me over to Dru being in jail and also Diana, two characters who before season 4 I said were treading on very thin ice, and I still think they are, especially when it comes to Dru. We know he's going to end up in jail at some point in part 2, which I think is going to happen pretty much straight away in episode 6. I do think majority of the teaser scenes that we saw from this particular trailer for part 2 are from episode 6, 7 and 8. But how and why does Dru end up in jail? It could actually be to do with Salim's body being found, because that body still needs to turn up. But whether Dru stays in jail for the entirety of part 2, who knows? We know Book 2 Ghost moves at a very quick pace. We've seen it before when Tariq was in jail back in season 2. So I am expecting Dru to be released at some point, and I wouldn't even be surprised if Carter blackmails him into doing some of his dirty work as a favour. But where do they realistically take Dru's story arc? His relationship with Monet and the Tejadas is very fragile. He's already lost Lorenzo, Ev, and Gordo. He thought he could finally get back to doing what he loves, only to find himself being pulled back into the game so soon after. Adding the fact that he's now wrapped around Carter's thumb, and where he'll also find himself in jail. It really is difficult to see him come out alive come the end of season 4. Whether they revisit Kane vs Dru, I do think they have left a few clues. Whether Carter pulls the trigger or someone else, I am keeping Dru on my death predictions list along with Zion, Elle, and Kamaal Tate. But what about Diana? Diana somewhat had this second chance. She made the decision to keep her baby, and I think that's something that will bring her and Monet closer together in part 2. However, we all know power. Just when we start to see characters rebuilding their relationships, just when they start to feel like they have a second chance to right some wrongs and head in the right direction, they're gonna rip it away in the most ruthless of ways. But when it comes to Diana, I have somewhat changed my mind after watching the teaser for part 2. I initially did think she maybe want to be taken off the chessboard instead of Dru, but I do think she will survive, but at the expense of her baby. Over the last few days I was talking to one of my good friends DJ, who does co-host my weekly Power Twitter live spaces along with Rudy P, and he mentioned what if this scene that we see Diana being on Demon Time is after she loses her baby. It would make sense as to why she's full of so much wrath and anger, absolutely smashing someone to death who could have been behind the loss of her baby. I mean, for Diana to turn into this monster, something we've never seen before from her character, definitely something big must have happened for her to attack the way she is, where she also might just get her first kill. So I do have Diana surviving, but losing a baby instead, and also potentially getting her first kill of the series too. Now elsewhere with the Tejadas, I do think Monet does deserve consequences for what she's done, and also what she's put her kids through, but I do think Monet and Kane will survive. Whether there's any more twists, let's wait and see, but I personally have them surviving, along with Jeanette, who's probably moved back to Atlanta. Now over to Davis MacLean, someone who definitely knows how to survive, but he is playing a very dangerous game in terms of playing between Noma and Tariq. We already know he's lost his brother, his law license, and his wife. And even though you never bet against a man who has nothing to lose, we know it never ends well for those who play between two wells. I'm personally hoping he does survive, but we also know what they did to fan favourite Joe Proctor, so let's see which direction they take his story arc. The same goes for Effie. Does the character journey end in season 4, or does she find a way to make it to Stanford? I do think that's going to be Effie's biggest dilemma in part 2, trying to figure out a way to get out from under Noma and also law enforcement and make her way to Stanford. But I do feel like Carter and his task force will have a huge influence in regards to whichever way her character arc goes when she is caught at the Russian's restaurant. We also need to see the introduction of her mother, because it has been teased Effie's mother will be playing a part in part 2, and how does that impact her mindset and her decision making, especially because of the history. So I'm still on the fence with both Davis MacLean and Effie, but they definitely are both in the danger zone. Now with Noma, it has been teased that she's working to get to the top of the food chain in part 2, but she will be having issues with her daughter Anya when she gets too close to the game, forcing Noma to think twice about her actions. So when it comes to Noma, her story arc will very much revolve around Anya and her going against her mother, which will no doubt be pushed by Tariq. The one way Tariq can hurt Noma is by getting to Anya, but he also knows to reach the top of the food chain, he also has to get rid of Noma, which I do think he can succeed in doing. It's just whether or not he has a change of heart in terms of being in the drug game and being at the top of the food chain himself. For example, if something happened to Tasha, that very well may change his mind. If something happens to his unborn baby, again, how does that alter his mindset? Let's not forget, he still needs to tell Tasha that he is going to be a father, and I wouldn't be surprised one bit if she turned around and warned him, leave this shit behind, focus on doing what's right. Your father may have been a lot of things, but leaving the drug game behind, he was definitely right about that in season 1. I think a lot will change from now until episode 10, which will make to reconsider all his options, and I don't think him going down the legit world should be ruled out just yet. Especially if something does happen to Tasha, I do think that would make him reconsider. But in regards to Noma's fate, again, a lot of these characters did expect to come back for season 5, so for some, they are definitely in the danger zone. Now elsewhere, they can easily take the Russians off the chessboard, and they will find themselves in trouble at some point in part 2. We've got Carter and his task force moving in on Effie at the Russians' restaurant, but maybe it could actually be one way in which law enforcement pick up another win. There's also the question mark around characters such as 2-Bit, who could potentially play a role in the coming spin-offs in terms of whatever they have planned next, and I do think that is a big factor we do have to consider. I think there are going to be a few characters who are alive, who could potentially tie into the next Power show. which is why I wouldn't mind seeing Brayden's character ending up in jail. Having him in jail keeps the door open for him to return in the new Power show, and it would also make his character that much more ruthless if he were to return in the future, just like they brought back 2-Bit. But those are my death predictions heading into Go Season 4 Part 2. I think Zion, Elle, and Kamaal Tate are definitely gone, and I'd also put Dru in there too. I think Diana's baby is also gone, but Rebecca Weston, Tasha, Carter, Davis MacLean, and Effie, along with Noma, I am putting them all in the danger zone, but I wouldn't be surprised if they survived either, because Season 4 wasn't supposed to be the last. But the floor is now yours. Let me know who you think makes it out alive and who doesn't. Drop all your thoughts and predictions down below in the comment section, and as always, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.